Yesterday, Snapchat came out and warned that they're not going to make their earnings estimates for this most recent quarter. Now, that is actually a huge deal for the American economy. Now, you might be sitting there saying to yourself, what do these Botox induced duck face selfies have to do with the economy as a whole? Well, you have to remember how Snapchat makes their money. Snapchat makes their money by selling advertising. And with Snapchat warning they're not going to make their earnings, that means American advertisers are not spending money. Now, that's a big deal because America is a 70% consumer-driven economy. 70% of GDP in the United States comes from consumer spending at stores. And the fact that Snapchat is making less money means advertisers are not spending their money to chase those consumer dollars. And you can see that in the Consumer Sentiment Index at its lowest level in over 11 years. And we're also seeing the same thing at retailers, with big retailers like Walmart and Target posting terrible quarters. We got the same thing just today with a lousy warning from Dick's Sporting Goods. We've also got Amazon talking about subletting their warehousing space. That means Amazon isn't doing as much throughput either. So what's going on? Americans just aren't spending money at stores right now. The answer lies in inflation. Now, to understand just how big of a problem this is and how inflation is actually killing the American consumer, you have to look at where Americans spend their money. If we look at the average American consumer, right now he spends about 27% of his income on food. He spends about 6.5% on energy. That's everything from electricity to natural gas to gasoline in his tank. And by far the single biggest line item in the average American's budget is 35% of their income on housing, whether it be a mortgage payment or rent. Alone, those three things combined represent 68.5% of the average American's income. Well, what does that look like? For the sake of round numbers, let's say this person is making $100,000 a year. And this is in 2021, last year's earnings. So last year, he would have spent $27,000 on food, $6,500 on energy, and $35,000 on housing. That means after all of that money was spent on food, housing, and energy, he's got $31,500 left over. And that's for everything. Now, that $31,500 left over, that's your discretionary spending. That's what he's got left over to spend on everything from movie theater tickets to a new blender to apparel to healthcare, education, tuition, all of it. $31,500 left over in 2021. Well, now let's take a look at what inflation has done to that consumer's spending habits. Based on the most recent CPI data from April, the 2021 inflation data looks a little something like this. The cost of food has gone up 9.4%. The cost of energy has gone up 30.3%. The cost of housing has gone up 5.1%. The problem is that 5.1% number, that doesn't really work. That's your CPI number. And I could talk for days about the way that the BLS calculates housing data is just absolutely bunk, but suffice it to say it grotesquely understates the cost of shelter. And if you go by the average home price and the average rent in the last year, all of a sudden that housing number goes from 5.1% to 17%. Now, the problem here with all of these price increases is that the average American's wages have only gone up 4% in 2021. So now we're going to look at that same consumer who made $100,000 last year, got a 4% raise, so this year he's making $104,000. Let's see what his income and his spending looks like now. Based on that $104,000 income in 2022 and looking at the inflation adjustments for food, energy, and housing, this American's spending now looks something like this. He's spending $29,538 on food. He's spending $8,470 on energy, and he's spending $40,950 on housing. Now that average American has just $25,042 left over. That represents a decrease of 20.5% in disposable income in just 1 year. So that average consumer, even though he's gotten a 4% raise at the beginning of this year, he's gone from having $31,500 in income left over after paying for the necessities. Now he's only got $25,042 left over. Can you see how Americans' retail spending is getting absolutely squeezed by these inflation numbers? Now, typically when you see a decrease in consumer spending like this, you start to see prices come back down, and that tends to resolve your inflation problem. However, our inflation problem is not just being driven by bad monetary policy, although that is a big factor, but the other factor in inflation is shortages. We've got shortages of fuel developing, and we've got major shortages of food on the horizon. Home prices, even though the housing market is showing signs of weakness, especially in the bond market, those prices still haven't come down yet. which means we are in this majorly stagflationary environment right now where we're going to see a big slowdown in economic activity, even though prices aren't going to come down. Prices are going to keep going up because these shortages are going to keep the costs high, even though consumer activity is about to fall off a cliff. So when you look at the spending data and how the average American consumer is being forced to spend more of his income on these necessities and he's just got nothing left over to spend on everything else, now you can understand why these retailers are taking such a big hit and why America's GDP, which is 70% driven by consumer spending, is in big trouble in the quarters to come. And with all these shortages in food and energy, there is really no light at the end of this tunnel right now. And if you want to know more about just how bad those food shortages could be getting, you can check out this video I did about how U.S. crop estimates are already starting to come down because of this fertilizer crisis. Till next time, live small and dream big.